Hello, my name is Matt Oswald, and this is a continuation of the video series on contributing to the NRE Labs curriculum. In this video, we're going to be opening a pull request. So in this video, we're going to be dealing with Git a lot more than we will in really any other video. And if you're not familiar with Git, we actually have a lesson on Git. So if you just want to go through that, you can head on over to go.nrelabs.io/catalog and search for version control with Git. That's the name of this lesson. And it's, I believe, a 5-part lesson. So there's a lot of content to consume there. If you've never touched Git before, you can get your first experience with it very easily within the NRE Labs user interface. Now, for contributing a lesson, if you remember in the previous videos, what we did was we used the Antidote CLI to bootstrap a new lesson and validate that that curriculum is still formed correctly using the Antidote CLI. So once we have a lesson at least started, you don't have to complete your lesson to do this. You can do it really at any point as long as you're sort of clear about what your intentions are, which we'll get to in a little bit. You can actually open a pull request really at any time. And as you'll see here in a little bit, we're opening a pull request pretty early, really before we have any content. Now, of course, your pull request won't be merged until it sort of satisfies a bunch of things like quality requirements, things like that. But there's no restriction on opening a pull request to begin with. So there's a few steps that we want to go for here. Really, the first 3 is what we're going to cover in this video. We're going to sort of keep step 4 off for the next video, where it comes time to preview our content, because there's some specifics around that we'll want to dive into. But for now, we'll just focus on opening a pull request. Step 1 is we really want to take the work that we've added thus far. We want to create sort of commits with those changes. So if you're not familiar with Git, again, go through that lesson. Really, what you do is when you want to make a change to a Git repository, you create a commit with those changes. And so we're going to make commits that represent the changes that we've made to the curriculum. We're going to push those commits to our fork, and then we're going to open a pull request, which basically says, "Hey, I've got changes on my fork. I'd like you, the NRE Labs project, to pull those changes back up into the mainstream curriculum." And then finally, we'll make sure that everything checks out from a continuous integration perspective. Once a pull request is open, there's a bunch of automated checks that take place. Just make sure that the basics are covered. Validation is one of the things that's actually done automatically, which is one of the reasons we did it ourselves on our laptop. Okay, so we're over here again in our locally cloned copy of our fork, of our curriculum fork. So if we do a git status, you'll see that our new lesson directory is here. If you see something else here, that's fine. Just be careful sort of what you add in the next step. We're going to be very specific and just say git add lessons, our new lesson. And that basically says I want you to add everything into, basically I want to add everything into Git that is in this subdirectory. And the good news is anything that we created using the wizard before is all inside that directory. So this is a nice way of really just saying, look, I just want to add everything I just created. Now, if you do that, it's always a good idea just to type a quick git status just to make sure everything that you intend is actually in there. So anything in green is going to be committed. So we'll do a git commit, and we'll sign it off just because. And we'll say our new lesson. And we'll say example lesson. Okay, and that's our commit. So the next thing we want to do is we want to git push, which basically says I'd like you to create, or I want you to push the commits of the local copy of the new lesson branch. I want you to push that to our remote, which is the repository in GitHub. So we'll git push origin, which is the name of the remote, and we'll do new lesson. And there we go. Now, there's a few things here. Since we're using GitHub, one of the things that GitHub allows us to do is it allows us to click this URL to automatically create a new pull request. You can, of course, do that if you wish. If you're quick and you head on over to GitHub, you can also see that they have a button provided here where you can automatically open a pull request for any branches that you recently pushed. We recently pushed the new lesson branch. I'm going to show you sort of the long way, and the reason for that is if everything else fails, this method will still work really at any time. So if you want a sort of a foolproof way to do it, this is the way to do it. But any of the other methods will work just fine. So we'll click New Pull Request. And here what we're doing is we're comparing different versions of the same repository. So we'll say, I want to compare the base repository, which is the one we forked from, and we'll compare that to the master branch because that's what we'd like to submit a pull request to. And we would like to compare that to our fork, but instead of the master branch, which you can see is identical between the two, let's compare it to the branch that we've created called new lesson. And basically what this says is I'd like you to take the changes that are new inside of this branch and merge them back into this base repository, into the master branch. And you can click the Create Pull Request button. What this does is it pops up a form for you to fill out. So there's a few things that I'd like to cover here, but I'll be brief because most of it's covered actually in the text. This is pre-filled really as a helper for you. So definitely go through and read some of this stuff. Most of it is commented out. You can kind of see this is a comment block. Read through these things and provide the detail that's required by this form. Not all of it's required, but some of it's just a really good idea. And anything you do provide here is helpful. Really, it's not quite possible to provide too much information to this form. And of course, if you've only had one commit and you maybe would like to change the name of this, you can say like new example lesson for a video, something like that. Now, finally, the last thing to cover here is if you click this little drop down, this is very important and very useful, especially if you open a pull request early. You have the option to either create a regular pull request or you could create a draft pull request. If you feel like you still have changes you'd like to make, but you just wanted to open the pull request nice and early, thank you. That's actually very helpful to maintainers so that they can see sort of what's coming and sort of maybe provide some guidance and advice early on. But also, it provides a nice signal for you to say, look, I'm not ready for this to be formally reviewed. I'm just creating it as a draft. And basically what that means is it allows everybody to sort of save a little bit of time. So if you're not quite ready for a formal review for your pull request, definitely make liberal use of that option. You can always change it back to a regular pull request later. That's totally fine. And as you can see, some of the diff that we saw before is also contained here. Everything that we created on the CLI is also here in the diff. So we'll create this as a draft pull request. Of course, if you want to add any labels, if you think you want to do that, that's fine. Maintainers may sort of modify those if they'd like, but we can just create the draft pull request. Now, this is just to create the pull request. Note that these changes haven't actually been merged yet. That's sort of what this process is all about. So creating this pull request is usually a pretty good idea to do really early on because there's not really anything wrong with opening the pull request. From here, you can actually have a conversation with the maintainers of the project. So if there's a comment, for instance, or maybe a review for your pull request, you can respond to that using this comment box here, or maybe comment boxes that are more contextually relevant. Now, if you get to this last step, you're in the right place. If you see a green checkbox here that says all checks have passed, then sooner or later you're going to get a comment by something called the NRE Labs Preview Bot. And this is actually going to be the subject of the next video where we cover sort of how to use this preview in much more detail. But for now, this is sort of what you're going for. If you don't see this, for instance, if you see some failed checks here, you'll be able to click some links there that take you to our CI service, which might provide some additional logs that might help you out. So for instance, if your lesson failed to validate, that'll be sort of provided there in terms of output. And of course, if you have any questions, just say just add a comment that says, hey, I'm not sure what's going on here. Can somebody help me out? And a maintainer will come by and sort of poke around and take a look at what's going on. Finally, if you want to add more changes, as is pretty common, you absolutely can do that. You really just need to keep pushing commits to the same branch. So for instance, if we were to edit our lesson guide and say like, this will be a new lesson guide, just as an example change, we'll save that. And then we'll type git status, we type git add lessons, git commit, another change, git push origin new lesson. This just adds another commit to that same branch, and the pull request will actually get updated accordingly. You can see that here actually. Another change commit is added here. So this is pretty cool. What this means is you can keep adding commits to this pull request, and anytime you do that, the full pipeline will be reapplied. So all of the checks that are applied here will rerun, and then if assuming those pass, again, another preview will be generated, and so on and so forth. Communicate what your intentions are. If you still like to make some changes, even if you've marked it ready for review, you could just say, hey, look, I'm not quite ready for this to be formally merged. Let me just keep making some changes. Maybe the preview showed you something that you didn't like, and you'd like to make changes. All of that is fine. Just be upfront about your communication and letting maintainers know what you're working on. Okay, and that is it for now. We'll discuss the preview functionality in the next video. So if you'd like to see your actual content in action and see how it looks, that is what we'll be covering in the next video. So if you'd like to go to that, head on over to the description below. Or, of course, you can head on over to our docs site at docs.nrelabs.io. Thank you.